Chapter 9. Brooke. The phone rang and my pulse quickened in response. I had been avoiding Mr. Potts for days, hoping he had better things to worry about than us. Millie spent the night at a different friend's house every night. Luckily, when you're 10, your friend groups are still large. I had a bag with clean clothes packed for her every afternoon. It turned out that laundry wasn't as difficult as I feared it would be. She came home, switched bags, and the process repeated. In each bag, I also packed a board game for the kids to play and a movie for them to watch. It wasn't much, but I felt like I needed to contribute something. "Hello?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Brooke, it's me," Raven said. "I'm so sorry, but Dad still won't let you come over. You know how paranoid and weird and overprotective he is." I did. He was really making things hard for me, but I also wished I had a parent who cared so much about me. "It's fine, don't worry about it. You did your best. Have you heard anything from the places I applied to?" I asked, hoping for some kind of good news. "I answer every call I get, but they've all just been spam. I'm actually getting more spam calls because I've been answering them," she said with a chuckle. I smiled, but made no sound to validate her joke. "It'll all work out," Raven assured me. "School starts in 3 days. You don't need to worry about a job anyway. You need to focus on getting your grades up so we can go to MSU together." She was trying to comfort me, but she unknowingly made it worse. She didn't know I was starving. She didn't know I was about to be homeless. She didn't know there was no way I could afford to go to college. "You're right," I said. "Call me if you hear anything, though." "Will do. See you Monday," she said, hanging up. I wished I could tell her, but I didn't want to burden her. She was my only friend. She sat with me while I cried when my mom would disappear. She held my hand at Grant's funeral. I still didn't know how she pulled off that scheme to be there without her dad knowing. She had been there for me time and time again, and I couldn't let her know that Millie and I desperately needed her, but her dad wouldn't allow it. It would have crushed her, or she would have done something stupid to jeopardize her relationship with her dad in order to protect me and Millie. The TV was no longer working because we hadn't paid the cable bill, so my only entertainment was the old movies we had gotten from thrift stores in the past. It was either that or sit and listen to the leaky faucet drip. I slept on the couch, so I heard that stupid faucet day and night. I was too afraid to stay in the bedroom by myself. I felt safer in the living room, where I could see the door and make sure no one tried to get in while I slept. A frantic knock caused my anxiety to spike again. He was here. He was going to kick us out. Thank goodness Millie had already come by to get her nightly bag. My getaway bag was packed by the door for when he came to evict us, packed full of everything I could carry that Millie or I might need. I kept the chain locked but cracked the door open. To my relief and utter horror, Jeff stood there. He shifted from foot to foot and didn't look me straight in the eye. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice soft and gentle. I shook my head no. I had never let him come in before. I certainly wasn't going to start now. I didn't trust him. He couldn't handle the train wreck that was my life, and he didn't even deserve a chance to try. He pursed his lips together, then asked, "Will you come out?" I looked back into our apartment, unsure of what to do. I hadn't left since Mom and her boyfriend left for fear that she and the guy would return. Since she had a key, the chain lock on the inside was my only defense against them. "Please," he pleaded, bringing my attention back to him and away from the vacant eyes that stole Grant's sapphire ring and Millie's chances of survival. I sighed, grabbed my keys, and gave in. Again. We walked in silence to his car. He opened the door for me and shut it gently. We pulled onto the street, still not saying a word. What could he say? Sorry I screwed my girlfriend hours after I screwed you? I didn't mean to? It was an accident? He had nothing. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, turning the dusty passenger vents so they hit me right in the face. It was so freaking hot, and I hadn't been outside all week to realize how hot it had actually gotten. "I don't know," he admitted, staring straight ahead. "Driving around, I guess." "Because you can't be seen in a restaurant with me?" I challenged him. "Or anywhere else in public like it was all summer?" He didn't answer. I would have thought he would have been more prepared since he seemed so desperate to talk to me, but he wasn't. I had never thought of Jeff as wealthy before. His parents lived in a trailer on their own land, not a mansion. His mom was my English teacher. They weren't wealthy by Holly standards. She probably thought she was slumming it with him. But he had a working car, where I did not. Mom had taken Grand's and had probably sold it by now. She was as desperate for money as she seemed the other day. He had the luxury of driving around without worrying about each cent of gas it ate up. I wouldn't have been able to justify gas money unless that gas was taking me to a job. Even though it wasn't glamorous, he had a house. He had all the food he wanted. There were probably leftover fries in the fast food bags at my feet. I could smell them. Had he gotten them right before he came to my apartment? Were they still warm and salty? How much would he judge me if I pilfered through a bag on the floor to eat them? I talked to the fishermen at the market today, he said. He had the tone of a mother who had caught their kid in a lie. I witched my head toward him, all thoughts of fries disappearing. Of all the things I expected to come out of his mouth, it wasn't that. I didn't realize you were friends with him, I said. He scoffed, looking at me with disapproval. I didn't realize you weren't. Brooke, why didn't you tell me that you didn't even know him? He asked, a look of concern on his face. What? I asked, my mind still reeling. What on earth are you talking about? He said that he had never met you before that day, he explained. He was literally just some creep in the woods who I left you alone in that house with. He could have been watching us, Brooke. Watching us do what? Have sex? I demanded. He stared at the road ahead and bit his lip, but didn't answer. That's what is really bothering you, isn't it? That he could know the truth. That he could tell her, I argued. You're afraid he followed us into the woods and now he has dirt on you. No, Brooke, that's not what it is at all. I wouldn't have left you with him if I knew. We'd have never gone with him in the first place. You seemed so familiar with him that I trusted him. I shouldn't have. I should have brought you straight to the hospital. I scoffed. Yeah, right. You would have left anyway. As soon as she called you, you would have gone running. It wouldn't have mattered if I was on death's door. He pulled over and parked the car. Is that what you really think of me? That I don't care about you at all? He slammed his hand on the steering wheel, but I didn't back down. I was hungry, tired, and irritable. It might have been better for him if I had searched for the fries in the floorboard. What have you done to prove otherwise? I demanded. What hidden clues have there been that I missed? I love you, Brooke, he argued. I have told you over and over. I am yours, but I'm lost. I don't think I want to be with Holly anymore, but I don't know how to end it. I need you to be patient and let me figure this out. She needs me. You don't know how bad things are for her. Please. I had no sympathy for poor rich Holly. She must have it bad in her mansion with her maid and private jet. It must be a hard burden to bear to have to drive such an expensive car to school every day. Holly had no idea what it was like to have a hard life. The worst thing that she had on her plate was something she didn't even know about yet, that her boyfriend slept with me. He took my hands in his and looked deep into my eyes. I could tell he meant it. In his heart, he truly cared about me. He was truly lost. He did love me just as much or even more. But this time, it wasn't enough. You haven't shown me, I whispered, pulling my hands back. His face fell and his jaw dropped. He hadn't been expecting that. He was expecting my undying love and unconditional patience. He was expecting me to wait around for him to break up with Holly and to be content with sneaking around in the meantime. And why wouldn't he have expected that? That was the precedent I had set so far. What? What do you mean? He asked. It's not enough for you to tell me. Love is action. You have done absolutely nothing to show that you love me, I explained. Your words don't mean anything if your actions are screaming something else. He said nothing as I exited the car and knelt down to get the last word. By the way, my arm is feeling better. Thanks for asking, I said as I slammed the door on his speechless face. There was nothing he could say. He had already exhausted me with words. I couldn't be swayed without action. It took me over 30 minutes to walk home in the August heat. The heat index had to be at least 110 degrees, and the air was thick enough that it made it difficult to breathe. Sweat began to trickle down my back. I longed for the feeling of cold tap water on my face and down my throat. I sighed in relief as the AC in the apartment complex hit my face. I walked down the hallway, put my key in the lock, and moved my hand to turn it while throwing my shoulder into it. The key didn't move. I pulled it out and put it back in, jiggling it to make sure it was in place. Still, it wouldn't turn. I double and triple checked, but I was using the correct key. It was old and dingy, but the lock was new and shiny. Mr. Potts had to have changed the locks. I ran down the hall and banged on his door. He opened it slightly with the chain in place as if I were going to attack him. If I had the ability and thought it would help the situation, I might have. You changed the locks? I yelled. That can't be legal. How are we supposed to get our things? Honey, I had to. I hoped your mom would pay when I finally saw her come in earlier this week, but she didn't. What else could I do? If I don't pay my bills, I could lose the whole building. I have to get a tenant who pays. She can sue you for this, I threatened. He nodded. She can, and she's welcome to. I scoffed and took a step backward. You know she won't. That's why you did it. You know you'll get away with it. He nodded. The odds of her fighting it are slim. It's definitely worth the risk on my part. Listen, I really didn't want to have to do this to you girls, but I'm as desperate as you are, Brooke. I had no other choice. Desperate. It seemed to be my new identity. Your mom can come back tomorrow to get her things, he said, closing the door. Wait, I said, shoving my foot out so he couldn't shut it. What about me and Millie? Can we come get our things without her? He nodded. Be here at 4, and I'll let you in. Will you let me in now? I need to get something real quick, I explained. I know exactly where it is. It's right by the door. Please let me grab it. I don't need anything else right now. He shook his head. Tomorrow at 4. The door clicked shut, and I was officially homeless with nowhere to go. I hadn't even eaten the fish I had budgeted for supper that night. Everything I needed was right on the other side of a locked door. My bag, water, food, shelter, air conditioning, a bed, safety. I didn't even have access to the triple antibiotic ointment and ibuprofen I had found in the medicine cabinet to help my arm. Hopeless and disoriented, I went to the market to find Peter. I had wanted to see him for days, but I didn't feel safe enough to leave the apartment. The vendors were packing up for the day, and he was already gone. The tomato vendor squinted his angry eyes at me, but I didn't have the energy to be embarrassed or ashamed. He positioned himself between me and his precious tomatoes while he packed up as if I were a threat to him. I didn't even like tomatoes. I only took one for Millie. I knew how to find the trail back to the river, but I wasn't sure I could find Peter's camper from there. I headed back across town, dragging my feet. I would have to sleep at the shelter and try to find him at the market tomorrow. I couldn't risk getting lost in the woods on top of everything else. I stood in line to check in at the shelter behind a man muttering to himself. I hoped the smell of my fear wasn't as obvious as the smell of alcohol on his clothes. The woman nodded when she saw him, and the door unlocked for him to enter. Name? The woman behind the wall asked when it was my turn. My heart was beating hard enough that it threatened to leave my body. Fear paralyzed me and kept me from speaking. Name? She asked again, glancing up at me. She didn't look like she was judging me, but it was still unnerving to see that bars covered the window in front of her. To protect her. From us. From me. Brooke, I said softly. Brooke Romero. She looked at me closely, squinted, and nodded her head. The door clicked open, allowing me to enter. Inside, I was immediately ushered into a cafeteria lined by the workers. They were kind and efficient. I stood behind the muttering man and volunteered to dump different colored piles of mush on my plate. Like the other people here, I didn't care what it looked like. It wasn't warm, salty French fries, but it was food. I planned on eating every bite. Despite its subpar presentation, it actually smelled really good. Here you go, dear, a sweet old lady at the end of the bar said as she put a plastic fork on my plate with a napkin. Go find you a seat. It was weird here, but it wasn't too bad. Maybe Millie and I could be okay. It would be better than sleeping outside and going hungry. I sat at a table where I could sit down without being too close to someone else. I wanted to sit and observe while I ate to see if we could be safe here until I figured out something else for us. Even though the people were older, the layout was similar to the cafeteria at school. There were long, rectangular tables with plastic yellow chairs. Plastic trays were making noise all around me, especially from the kitchen where the workers were washing them. Some babies were softly crying, making my heart clench. How much harder would my situation be if I had a baby on top of everything else? As infuriating as it was that he planned it ahead of time, I was at least thankful that Jeff had brought a condom to the woods. I hoped for Holly's sake he brought 2 since it turned out to be such a busy night for him. Man, I was an idiot for sleeping with him. I would have given anything to be able to erase it. I had barely finished shoveling my first pile of mush in my mouth when someone took a seat across from me. Mom. What are you doing here? She asked. She actually had a mom look of concern on her face. It was disorienting and a total 180 from the woman who had been in the apartment only days earlier. We got evicted, I stated, because you and that guy stole the last bit of money you left me with. My voice cracked, so I tried to channel my sadness into anger. I couldn't let her see me cry. I didn't trust her with my tears. I didn't trust her with anything. She looked confused, but her eyes were clear. Me and a guy? What guy? I didn't ask what his name was, I mumbled, taking another bite. I hoped she would take the hint and leave me alone. I wasn't going to sit and chat with her. I was here to survive, not hash out my feelings with my mother. I didn't steal anything from you, Brooke, she argued. I wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, you did, I said, staring her down. Either you or him, I'm not sure, but you brought him to our apartment. Our entire bedroom was turned upside down. Gran's ring was stolen, too. Don't act like you care about that, though. You were tripping out so much that you didn't even remember that she died. She flinched as if I slapped her, but I felt no remorse. I was only relaying the facts. I don't remember coming to the apartment with a guy. She never let me bring anyone over. Wonder why, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I shoveled another bite and tried to turn my body away from her. I was done with her. So done. I wish she was here to fix it, she whispered, holding her head in her hands. Her voice cracked, and she looked like she could be an actual person. She looked like she might be more than the villain in my story. She could be my mom. I wish she would be. I wish she could be someone I could lean on. It made me even more furious that I would never be able to rely on my mom the way she relied on hers. Looks like we both want something impossible from our moms, I mumbled. This time I wasn't saying it to hurt her. I was saying it because I was hurt. I was broken and bleeding, and she hadn't done a single thing to help me. She had even made it worse. Over and over again. Tears filled her eyes. You don't know what it's like, Brooke. I have tried so hard to quit. Time and time again. I've been through rehabs more times than I can remember. Every time I get clean there or in jail, I think this is going to be the time it finally clicks. And then I get out and life knocks me right back down again. It's your choice, I argued. You choose the drugs over us, time and time again. She shook her head. No! It's not as simple as that. My brain is addicted, Brooke. It messes with my ability to reason, to make good choices. What I want in my heart and what my body does aren't the same thing. I tapped my foot and bit my lip to keep from screaming. I prayed to the God who didn't seem to want to help me that she would leave me alone and let me eat in peace. What do you want from me? She asked quietly. What can I say to make you understand? The years of being neglected came to a head as I looked at her and instantly found a way to blame her for everything wrong in my life. And without Gran there to intervene, I shattered. I grabbed the plastic tray and slammed it down on the table. You can't say anything. Nothing you can say will make it better. Cut it out, a man by the door warned me. But I was too far gone. I stood, thinking that she should be thankful there was a table between us. You condemned us to death for the sake of your drugs. We have no food, we have no home, but thank freaking goodness you were able to get high. And now that's gone too. You can't get high and we can't survive. Your selfishness has finally brought us all down with you. I flipped what was left of my plate over in her direction, causing the people around me to gasp. She started sobbing, and the man by the door stalked toward me. She was actually choking on air as if she felt the guilt of everything I was heaping on her. And do you know what the worst part is? I said as he grabbed my arm and led me to the door. You haven't even asked about Millie. You're so used to someone else taking care of her that you didn't even wonder why she isn't here with me. He pushed me through and slammed the door as soon as I cleared the doorway. I flinched when I heard the lock click. There was no one behind the bars to reason with. The shelter was at capacity and closed. My only options were to sneak into Raven's house, which was guarded by a perimeter stone wall and security cameras, or to go try and find my way to Peter. Dusk had begun to settle on Midnight Springs, so I walked as swiftly as I could to the trail to the river. I would have to find it and then yell for him, hoping he would hear me. It felt like my only choice. It wasn't like I could sleep outside in the park. I tried to retrace my steps from earlier in the week when he pointed me toward the town, but everything looked different in the dark. Even if the sun was still shining bright, all the trees looked the same. I was too upset to think clearly, too upset to take in my surroundings and make sure I wasn't being followed. I was too far into the woods to turn back when I realized I heard footsteps behind me. The hair on the back of my neck stood as my body went into danger mode. I told myself it was just a squirrel or a bunny. There was no reason for me to be irrational. I had to keep going. There was no other choice. I almost cried with relief when I found the trail, but it was short-lived. The steps were still behind me, and it sounded like they were getting closer. They were calm and steady as they stalked me. I didn't veer from the trail, afraid of where I would end up. If I had the trail, I had a destination. The woods spanned for acres and acres. It would be all too easy to get lost if I frantically chose to leave the path. However, the beaten trail made it harder to hear them. There were still leaves, but they had been flattened from Peter's many treks to the market and back. All the large sticks had been removed, presumably so he could push his cart easier. I had to really strain to listen to the steps behind me. Picking up my pace, I tested them to see if they would pick up theirs. They did. There were definitely more than 2 feet behind me. I couldn't fight. I wouldn't freeze, not this time. So I fled. As soon as I started to run, I heard all of the feet crashing behind me. They were no longer trying to be stealthy. "Peter!" I yelled, hoping he would be able to hear me. How far away was his camper? Was it even possible? Was he even in the woods? I couldn't see the river when they caught up to me, but I could hear it gurgling along in the night, unaware of the terrifying scene unfolding so close to its bank. Would they dump my body in the water when they were done with me? Would anyone find me? Would Peter find me? "Peter!" I yelled again as they grabbed me. In the back of my mind, I kind of hoped it was an animal chasing me, but the hands that held me were human. That was so much worse. I would have rather been torn apart by rabid teeth than endure what I knew was coming at the hands of these men. How many were there? "Pete!" One of them put his hand over my mouth from behind. I leaned against him and used him as leverage to kick the other. He stumbled but quickly regained his balance to grab hold of my feet as they wrestled me to the ground. I fought. I fought with all of my might. Every muscle in my body moved as I flailed like a wild woman. I would not go down easily. My arms screamed in pain as Peter's stitches did their best to hold my skin together. I bit the hand on my mouth hard enough to draw blood. I would do my best to make sure they regretted choosing me as a victim. "Peter!" I yelled when my mouth was free. I shrieked his name louder than I had before, my panic rising. I didn't know if Peter could hear me, but I knew that if he did, he would come. He had come to save me in the woods once before. I could trust him to do it again. Until then, I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't stop fighting.